Hey all, it's Juan from the future from when this video was originally shot. Now, I staged this comparison before the announcement of the Vivo X300 Pro. And while editing, my heart just really wasn't into finishing this comparison. My patrons encouraged me to post a draft, and we talked about putting out a public version, and that's why this video is here now, based on their feedback. I'm definitely in burnout. I'm pretty tired of pointing out the inequity in reviews, how social media platforms hurt content creators, and how we're losing competition in the consumer space. I'm kind of tired of highlighting what I think is good competition, then having nerds rake me in the comments on those videos when they publish, and then years later seeing folks come around and miss those brands that we used to cover. And likewise, I'm really tired of criticizing the companies that pour the most money into marketing, then see all the fanboys skulk off and call me a hater, and then we suffer truly awful trends like thin phones that nobody's asking for. The companies at the top of the sales charts right now, especially here in North America, are not bringing us their best because they don't need to. They don't have real competition, and they can pressure carriers to promote products to consumers. I am not asserting that Apple, Google, and Samsung are actively colluding, but I don't think they need to. I think they can watch each other and just not push too hard to actually compete. And this vibes directly with the internal messages we've seen from Apple executives about how they need to slow down progress and walk back features on the iPhone, ostensibly while continuing to charge their customers more. Now, if that's one of the market leaders, we're not really seeing Google and Samsung use this as an opportunity to push past the iPhone, but more as a way to also coast on hardware and features which might be valuable to consumers. So in this video, I did not intend to tag the Pixel as hard as I ultimately did. I'm frustrated, and my feels got the better of me. And I'm gonna show you that, knowing it's probably gonna get me more grief down in the comments. I still feel it's critical to hold the largest companies to a higher standard and demand more of them when they exert tremendous influence over the media and the markets they occupy. They should face more scrutiny, and we should not go easier on them just because they rank higher in search and trends, and influencers will make more money on videos that feature popular topics. That's not how we foster better competition. So if you're not in the mood for that kind of criticism, especially coming from someone on the sardonic side, don't watch this. Go be happy with the tech you like, and you don't need this in your life. If you're down for a tired, cranky dude who's frustrated and tired and cranky, I'll present to you without further delay my comparison between the Pixel 10 Pro XL and the Vivo X200 Pro, brought to you in part through the recommendations of my patrons at patreon.com/SomeGadgetGuy. Enjoy. The timing on this is just getting silly. There are new phone announcements from Oppo and Vivo and Xiaomi right around the corner, and Google has released their latest and greatest Pixel, and I think we can do a quick point-for-point showdown. One of my favorite phones this year is the camera-focused Vivo X200 Pro. This phone got a slightly wider international release, but it's not Vivo's top-of-the-line Ultra, which was really only sold in China. This is not sold in the USA, but even for us neglected Americans, it's helpful to see what's out there and how the rest of the world is kind of leaving us behind. So, starting with design, I wish that Vivo had given us a true flat front screen. I like that on the Pixel. It makes it easier to put on screen protectors. It probably makes the screen a little more durable, but I really like how Vivo's rear design stands out. The rest of the Pixel feels almost identical to an iPhone in the hand, and the big circle on the rear of the Vivo makes a pretty bold claim about the camera tech, especially with that little Zeiss badge. People don't ask me about phones like they used to, but I still get questions about Xiaomi and Vivo when I'm shooting photos at school events for my daughter. Now, I don't use flashes often with my phone photos, but both phones get the flash placement wrong. It should never be under the lens. That's kind of dumb. Both phones have nice bright displays. The Pixel bursts to a slightly brighter output that I I can see to my eye, but it can't keep that high brightness for long. And especially when you're using the cameras, it runs warm, it starts to throttle down. The Vivo peak brightness can sustain a little longer before the phone has to shut that off. Both of these phones have ultrasonic in-display fingerprint sensors, so that's a wash between the two, but we like to see that becoming more common. And the speakers are decently matched as well. Here, take a listen. And for fun, wacky features, the Pixel has the thermometer, which I'm still not sure why that's the thing Google needs to include on its phone. They don't even talk about it that much. The Vivo has that IR blaster, which even in an era of streaming sticks and smart TVs, it's still really handy. My daughter just lost the TV remote again, and getting all of our AV equipment turned on was easier because of the phones we have with IR blasters. As a quick rundown on some of the more surface level stuff, and now we got to start getting into the heavier stuff, like performance, and it's just a rough go for the Pixel. The Vivo is packing the MediaTek Dimensity 9400, and this chip is an absolute champ. It's a monster at CPU-bound tasks. In most real-world apps that I can test, if you do any work on a phone CPU, it's done the fastest on a Dimensity, even outpacing this generation of Qualcomm Snapdragons. The Pixel 10 Pro is closer, if slightly behind, last year's Snapdragon 8 Gen 3. That's not a great look for Google after this big move to TSMC. Still an improvement over the Pixel 9 in CPU performance, but it's hard to get excited when a few phones launched at the end of 2022 might be able to give Google's latest and greatest a run for its money still. So why bring this up? Why would this matter? Tech influencers are always so quick to rush out some kind of cultural elitism argument like, I'm happy to spend the most on a phone that does the least because I also have been convinced to buy multiple computers to do individual tasks per computer. Please appreciate the dripping sardonicism, but even for the average consumer arguments, we can draw some basic trends on completing tasks. When I show video editing and how the Vivo can accomplish the same task in half the amount of time, you don't need to be a tech math genius to work out that the Vivo is using its chip half as long. It's doing the same amount of work, but using a lot less battery to accomplish that task. Anything that touches the CPU will be done faster, so the phone can get back to a low power resting state faster. If the phone is resting faster, you can do more on it before you need to recharge it again. If you can go longer in between recharges, then the battery will last longer before it degrades and you need to replace it. You can say you don't care about those kinds of repairs or you flip a phone every other year, but then don't act like promises of software support matter either. Horsepower and performance still matter a great deal, no matter how hard Google's PR is trying to convince us otherwise. The Vivo is so much more powerful. We shouldn't be as concerned about future apps that might demand more performance or future skins or UI elements that could be more graphically taxing. The Pixel's gonna kind of hold us in place with performance that resembles a phone from several years ago. And the Vivo will accomplish all that with less wear and tear on the most critical obsolescence piece of hardware, the battery. Let's not pretend Google's just doing great with battery tech, phones failing, throttling performance, and recalls right now. I'm not gonna belabor this point too hard, but even after updates, the Pixel is the absolute worst ultra-priced performer for gaming this year. I'm gonna have nerds crawl out of the woodwork to proudly proclaim that they don't care about such things, and I don't game on phones, but it's even such a step down from the Pixel 9 in many titles that there's no rational way to paint that as acceptable at this price. Google owns this one. They should be embarrassed about this. So you can load up and play games on this phone, but even though there's precious little optimization for MediaTek chips, I'm playing actual PC titles installed directly from my Steam account on a Vivo. You can complain all you want about terrible mobile games, I'm with you, but if we have a more powerful device, we can just emulate a PC. Some of this gaming performance outpacing my Steam Deck. I'm looking at terrible frame rates for Android titles installed from Google Play on my Pixel. If you really prioritize gaming on mobile and are interested in console and PC emulation, the top choice is Qualcomm. But there's so much more you can do with a Dimensity than you can with a Tensor. Now, I kind of glossed over this point. I want to circle back here for just a second to talk about battery life and battery health. Just real quick, I overlooked the capacity differences in that rundown. Google charges more for less in almost every hardware area of this phone. The Vivo's battery is not class leading, but it's 15% larger than the Pixel, and it has real fast charging, and you get a real fast charger in the box with the price of the phone. Again, I'm gonna have fans say they aren't bothered by embarrassingly stupid slow charging because they just buy more expensive wireless chargers and they plug in and charge overnight. I'm so happy to run that battery harder overnight on a phone that will automatically start throttling your battery after 200 charge cycles, regardless of what state your battery health is actually in. I hope someone out there can clue me in, because I've done a little digging, but I haven't tried to do anything too comprehensive. If you have a resource that comments on this specifically, please send me a link, because I don't think we put much effort into testing the other brands. But I'm seriously starting to suspect that super fast charging, like the Vivo's 90-watt charging, might be better for battery longevity. We have a larger capacity to start, and the battery reaches an elevated temperature for a shorter period of time. Ideally, you should only charge when you need to, for me on this phone, every other day, but it's so slow on the Pixel. Google is copying Apple here in preying on your battery anxiety to sell you more stuff and to wear out your phone faster, so you'll need to replace it sooner. I am so thankful that both phones support some form of bypass charging, and you should absolutely use tech like that if you find yourself using your phone while it's plugged in. I believe the Pixel will only flip to bypass charging if you activate the 80% charge limit and the phone charges up to 80%, which means you could plug in at 50% and still run the battery hot and hard until it gets to that bypass limit. On the Vivo, it's a little convoluted. You have to add specific apps to a gaming menu, but when bypass is activated, it should bypass charging at any charge capacity. It's not as automatic to turn on, but the user has more control here, regardless of how both phones support a critical feature. Vivo's entire framework and solution for power management is just better than Google's, but don't overlook those features that are gonna help your batteries last longer and help keep these devices out of landfills. And a lot of this has already been kind of spicy, but now we gotta talk about cameras, and this is probably gonna be the most controversial section of this video. I am so tired of the lazy truthiness on phone cameras. A bunch of influencers just cluck around and parrot things like, iPhones take the best videos, Pixels are the best photos. And none of that's true. It's not. You can rail in my comments or whine about average consumers when an influencer with millions of subscribers holds up a $1,300 phone for average people. None of your complaining is going to make those lazy assessments of camera performance any more true. The best camera for you is the one you're most familiar with. But we can make some critical arguments about camera hardware and performance. There are some trends in camera tech we can use to help guide someone, but really, we know most folks, techies included, are shopping a brand they like first and then justifying the purchase because they like the brand. I like this phone company, so I like the photos that come from this phone. I'm trying to head off a lot of arguments down in the comments. I don't know why I'm spending the time, but I know folks are gonna trot out blind photo comparisons, right? We've seen some of those videos, some of those setups, how Pixels often win those comparisons. And you're gonna hit me with that and act like, man, you got me. But unfortunately, it really makes my point for me. When you take boring, lifeless, poorly framed Instagram person shots, you're not really driving a camera system that hard. And funnily, Pixel and Pixel A series can often score near or above the Pixel Pro phones in those comparisons. My argument has always been pixels are only the bestest if the person using one has zero curiosity about photography, pulls phone from pocket, pushes shutter button once, and puts phone back in pocket. The kind of person who not only won't dig much through a camera app, but might not even know they can tap on the screen to focus on a specific person. The person who is incurious about framing, composition, anything that makes an image more interesting to look at. Exactly the kind of person who isn't likely to drive a phone camera hard, and in those lazily composed comparisons, Pixel A phones seem to score just as well, right? So what is the advantage of having somewhat better hardware when the processing is so heavy-handed that in a blind comparison, people seem to prefer the less expensive non-Pro Pixels over the more expensive Pro Pixels? We're already walking this tangent. Let me just keep going for another second. I'll wrap up this point. I think Google has been coasting on this reputation, this photography reputation, since the Pixel 4, and now they're getting outpaced by Vivo, Oppo, Xiaomi, Honor, and Huawei. Against the Vivo, the main sensor sizes are the same, but the Vivo is using a newer main wide camera sensor that improves on low light performance. The ultra-wide sensor is a little bigger on the Vivo, and the telephoto sensor on the Vivo is almost as large as the main camera on the Pixel. It is an enormous hardware advantage for the Vivo. Googs can try and make the claim that software and AI make all the difference, but better hardware can arrive at better images, especially when the software is primed to take advantage of the better hardware. Now notice, I've been rambling for a bit here. Notice I haven't talked at all about resolution. The megapixels mean nothing. Sensor size is what matters. I could put 11 billion dots on a miserably tiny little sensor and it would deliver garbage images. Bigger sensor, bigger pixels, bigger photo sites, more light. Anytime you catch a review and you hear a reviewer say something like, it's got a 50 megapixel lens. Lens! No, sensor size is what's important. So, as an example between these two, I want to focus on the telephoto sensors. Google has a bigger zoom number. It's a 5x zoom, and the Vivo is only a 3.7x zoom. If we were comparing the field of view to a full-frame camera, we call that equivalence. The Pixel has about a 110mm lens, and the Vivo has about an 85mm lens. The native optical reach of both phones, the Pixel can reach a little bit farther. But remember those sensor size differences? How do we zoom on a phone camera? That's right, we crop information away. So if I crop the image on the Vivo to match the field of view on the Pixel, the surface area capturing the photo is still larger on the Vivo than the Pixel's sensor at its native full resolution. The Vivo is starting with a decent enough advantage that when we push to a 10x zoom, the Vivo is having to crop more than the Pixel in terms of percentage, but it had more sensor to start with. And because the Vivo sensor is so large, we get other perks like a shallower depth of field. Elements behind your subject will be less distracting. And Vivo doesn't sharpen as aggressively to make weird details in your background stand out more. Plus, there's a huge low light advantage with the Vivo telephoto. It's a larger surface area that can soak up more light per second. So in an intense night mode test, the Vivo delivers a better image. You can't say Google has better software processing here. Their processing can only be as good as the data they can get from the hardware and how much that noise reduction filtering has to scrub out all the noise from a smaller sensor. Next, the Pixel telephoto can't close focus. You can take a macro from the ultra wide, but I think those look awful most of the time. And it's a pain because your phone will often block light because you have to hold the phone so close to your subject. On a Pixel, your best bet is to use a 2x crop from the main camera, and that's pretty good. That's not bad. But the Vivo can get really close from the telephoto. You're just always going to win with a telephoto macro. If you care at all about what you want your image to look like, you're probably better off leaving the Pixel camera app. And if you're already gonna leave the app, why not leave the hardware too and get better camera hardware. The software argument doesn't help much. Google's big new feature for this year is a guide to tell you how to better frame your subject. That really reinforces my point on who the Pixel has been sold to. And again, that's a feature that would likely make a more meaningful impact for folks buying Pixel A than Pixel Professional. But Juan, I can hear some folks saying, but Juan, Pixels have manual modes now. They too can be controlled just like your precious Vivos and Xiaomis. Yeah, there's a menu down there, except Google kinda lies to you. Sure, I can tell the Pixel I want ISO 3200 because the scene is dark, but the Pixel won't do that. Even shooting RAW, the Pixel tries to give me the equivalent of what I asked for, but it's also heavily editing the RAW file and running noise reduction, but at a much lower ISO. Samsung and Vivo have modes that do the same thing. There's Expert RAW on Samsung, Super RAW on Vivo. Those modes deliver a pre-edited RAW file. But even Samsung, the liar of moon zoom nonsense, even Samsung doesn't lie about regular RAW files like Google does. Every RAW file from the Pixel camera app is some kind of stacked or processed DNG. And I've covered this before on the Pixel. I'd rather have a photo with a little more ISO noise, but sharper, clearer, and better frozen movement. I'm really starting to dislike Google's processing, and that's getting worse at the farther zoom range. People have left comments on some of my other videos like, oh, even Vivo is doing all this AI processing. And honestly, I don't love the far end of the zoom on any phone. It's not really useful shooting at 100x zoom. All those photos look pretty lame, but what Vivo is doing is heavy-handed sharpening. What Google is doing is using AI to just make stuff up. I took a photo of a mural at 100x zoom, and yeah, the Vivo went real heavy-handed on sharpening. It's a black wall with a mural of a rainbow-colored weeping willow tree. But the Pixel saw this same scene and decided that the wall must have been rainbow-colored wigs. It made the wall and the painting look like realistic hair. That's not only super fake and obnoxious, it's also just wrong. I look at that and I immediately think, can I ever trust a Pixel to deliver authentic images? I know Google is messing with my RAW files, and their AI is messing with detail in my frame. We're already seeing court cases argue whether phone images can be trusted as evidence now. Good job, AI companies. You're eroding the usefulness of one of the main features people use on a smartphone. And I could go on. My camera reviews are often over half an hour long because it takes so long to talk through all of this stuff people just cluck out as truthiness. But a couple other key points. The Pixel still can't finish its own 8K video. You have to waste storage space on Google Drive up in the cloud if you want that resolution. The image stabilization on the Pixel is good, but the Vivo is ridiculous when you start zooming. The Pixel keeps floating around your scene. It's incredibly difficult to get it to stay put, where the Vivo locks you in like you're on a tripod. The Vivo has a much better buffering system, so you can take more photos back to back before the phone is bogged down, processing photos in the background. And the Vivo has incredible 4K 120 frame per second video modes on the main camera and the telephoto. 4K 120 is awesome. You can go from real-time footage to 1/4 slow motion with incredible fidelity. And if nothing I'm saying about camera tech matters to you and you're already rushing down to my comments, you know what I'm gonna reply with. If none of this stuff matters to you, you really should not be buying phones over $600. If nothing about this matters to you at all, then you also won't get any better images out of a Pixel 10 Pro than you would a Pixel 10 non-Pro. To get better images, you kind of need to care a little about how this stuff works. And how do we know this? Well, we have creators that love to stage blind comparisons, and Pixel A series phones can often hang with or beat Pixel Pro phones in those kinds of staged blind comparisons. And it's not all manual modes and advanced photography. The Vivo is a fantastic point-and-shoot option, and it has room to grow to drive this camera hardware significantly harder. The Vivo gives you better tools to accomplish that vision. Whew. And wrapping this video up, I just can't care that much about software and AI. The bulk of the features that Google is promoting right now. The second you tell me this is a feature that gets activated with an AI Pro account on your Google Drive subscription, you're telling me it's something that any other phone could do too, and probably will eventually. Vivo has a bunch of similar editing and AI tools on the X200 Pro. They're probably a half step behind Google on most of them, so I guess some might care about being the first to use a new Gemini feature on a Pixel, but that's a short-lived advantage. Google cares more about their data centers seeing traffic and sucking up all that user data. They're not gonna hold an exclusive feature that long if it proves popular in the slightest. They're gonna spread that around. Example, I don't really use things like Circle to Search, but it's here on the Vivo. Vivo has their own version of Magic Eraser and AI upscale and repair tools, real-time speech-to-text for video files, transcription in the memo recorder, and if you need your chatbot, you can install Gemini from the App Store. I think Google's call screening is more sophisticated, but Vivo's custom spam blocking is actually pretty decent. Right now, for me, in terms of practical features, the only winning software bit on the Pixel, it has a more functional desktop mode, while we're still waiting on Vivo to get Android 16 out the door. This refresh in the developer options is not as good as Honor Magic Desktop or Moto Ready 4 or even LG Screen Plus from 5 years ago, but it is finally kinda functional. I'm really hoping that comes to all Android devices as we see Android 16 roll out more broadly. I can't say it's enough to convince me to use the Pixel for anything I care about, and I've been desperate to see desktop modes succeed for years now, and it's still not enough to move me to this phone. The last bit wasn't in my script. I'm getting real spicy here. We get to the end of this, and I'm struggling. I cut so much out of this script that was even harsher on the Pixel because I can't avoid this last point. I can import the Vivo, the global version with 512 gigs of storage from eBay for under $1,000. With the same storage, the Pixel 10 Pro XL's MSRP is $1,319. It's 30% more expensive than the Vivo. $300 more expensive. I want people to love the phones they own. But that also means being somewhat educated on what you're buying. You can't really love it if you don't know or understand anything about it. I can't see any comparison or showdown worth producing where you get to the end and say, you should feel great spending 30% more on a device that loses almost every single comparison point, is years behind the competition in performance, and is built in a way that will encourage consumers to either replace their phones sooner than they need to, or to pay for repairs sooner than a competing device. Who's supposed to feel good about that kind of comparison? So I need to hear from you in the comments. Someone has to talk me down from this ledge. There has to be something else, right? I have to be missing something. Something has to make this a better buy than what I can see while I'm using it. If you like your Pixel because you're familiar with Pixel and you just don't want to try anything different, that's great. That's good for you. I think you're getting ripped off, but I'm not your dad. You can spend your money however you want. But is there an actual reason or a feature or some kind of performance that I'm just overlooking here? I'm not throwing out that lazy engagement bait. Like I just spent all this time breaking down the differences between these two phones and I get to the end and I'm like, hey guys, I'm chill and boring, but what do you think about these two phones? Which one do you think wins this showdown? I know what the audience demographics are gonna look like. I can look up the popularity of all these different devices on Google Trends. I want to hear some arguments of substance, hoping someone is gonna point out the thing I've missed. So please drop me some of them hot takes down below this video. And now I've got to put a pin in this. As always, thanks so much for watching. for sharing these videos. The sharing is really important. And of course, subscribing to the channel, smashing that bell icon. But of course, we know Google and YouTube algorithms have been really toxic for us creators lately. So if you'd like to stay up to date, like if you've caught this channel, you haven't realized that I've still been putting out videos, the best thing to do is not get your notifications and alerts from YouTube. Either subscribing through RSS, you can catch all of my content over on SomeGadgetGuy.com, or the best place to keep up to date and know exactly when new stuff is coming out is from my Patreon. That's patreon.com/SomeGadgetGuy. This list of names scrolling by on your screen right now, a huge thank you from the bottom of my heart, as these are the folks that are helping to keep the lights on here in the Gadget Lab. They get early access to a lot of my videos. They get my videos in 4K, production diaries behind the scenes, the private Discord. They're basically the coolest tech pals in the universe, so I hope you'll check them out. I hope you'll consider joining the community at patreon.com/SomeGadgetGuy. Now, you know where you can find me across the rest of the internet, at SomeGadgetGuy, basically everywhere, but these days, trying to spend a bit more time on the Mastodons, a little on the Blueskis, and a lot less so on the Facebooks, the Threads, the Instagrams, and none at all on that dumpster fire site. And I will catch you all on the next comparison. Fight for blood!